Hello, welcome again to Fedi Adimifi's podcast. Like I will tell you, I'm a storyteller. I love stories, whether I'm reading a good novel or I'm watching a great film over coffee. I love stories. One of the most exciting aspects of stories, conversations are important. Learning from people as they grow, evolve, create, build. Every conversation is an epiphany. You get to learn. And sometimes we learn from people's greatest moments and their lowest moments and everything in between. Today, I have a guest who is very versed in policy, understanding the creative economy, more importantly, capital, access to capital for the creative economy. How do we balance our entrepreneurial pursuit with family? He's a married man again. So we'll also talk a bit about that. And then I always try to get behind your dream for Africa and sometimes spirituality, just knowing how do you stay grounded in a world that is always seeking to drift us apart. Today, I would like to introduce to you our guest, Kelechi Ekugo. Please,
Well,
welcome.
thank you, Fedi. Pleasure to be here, and I'm glad you've really taken that leap of faith to get this podcast up and running.
Yes. And I'm glad because it's one of the gifts of this moment is getting to hear people like you share. And I've known you for some time, but in course of this podcast, I got to discover more exciting things about you that dates back all the way to Yaradua, coming back to the country at a young age to work in policy. Wanted to really ask you the question, why Nigeria? Because a lot of your colleagues, after learning, stay back and grow wealth. You're here, and this is your second missionary journey, and it doesn't look like you're even going anywhere too soon. Because the last time you spoke about a fund you're trying to put together for the creative economy, so
Right.
the connection to this place. I mean, why are you here at this time in Africa, in Nigeria?
Well, thank you very much. First and foremost, I'll probably take it back to my childhood and background. I had the privilege of being born in Germany, actually in West Germany, in the very early 80s.
You speak German?
My nine. Interestingly, my parents shipped me back when I was about 4, 5, thereabout. President Yaradua then was Major General. Sorry, President Buhari then was the military head of state at the time. And so my parents met in Germany and, married and conceived me and my sister at the time. Came back about 84, 85, thereabouts. I could vividly remember my first entrance into Nigeria. I mean, we flew on a Lufthansa, arrived right bang in the evening, and my dad whisked us to the apartment in Bagada. And I remember that moment I saw my first blackout. You heard electricity blackout. And, that began my experience into my home country, Nigeria. So pretty much grew up in Nigeria, primary, secondary school. Majority of my education, I mean, primary to secondary was Lagos. Did secondary school in Ogun State, perhaps more outskirts of Lagos, Agbara, then Odobolu. And obviously, I grew up on the mainland, which I have very fond memories of. That's where a lot of my childhood memories are immersed. And then had the opportunity of crossing over to the UK right after secondary school. Attempted a few JAMB, but
You got jammed.
I got jammed. And so I moved on to the UK. Had my education in the UK, came out with a degree in financial services, had a brief stint working for the financial services sector in the UK. And whilst in the UK, I was pretty much one of those regular, typical Nigerians that will sit down at the back of their computer, Google everything that is happening in Nigeria or Africa at large, and would always have some element of critique. Oh, why are they doing this? What's going on? Oh, what's wrong with this country? And would always have an opinion with myself and amongst my peers and friends and all of that. But I think in hindsight, I was very pro Nigeria just by being in the diaspora in the UK. Found myself indulging in a few Afrocentric or Nigerian related communities. So I remember being nominated to chair some young Nigerians in the diaspora, professional Nigerians in the diaspora forum. At some point, I was asked to come and be a vice chair to Abia State Indigenes in the UK. And I mean, my community from Abia State, we had a development community union, unpacks development union. I was also sort of, nudged to be part of that community, and so we'd meet every month, last Sunday of the month. So somehow, whilst being in the UK, I was still very much drawn to the country and I guess community.
So at this time, you're still working with JP Morgan Chase?
Morgan Stanley.
Morgan Stanley.
Morgan Stanley, correct. Yeah. Of course, building my professional career as well out of Morgan Stanley, correct. And then 2009, I had a rare opportunity or privilege of being invited to come and serve as a technical assistant under the Federal Ministry of Finance, which was then led by Dr. Mansour Mukhtar, who is now at the Islamic Development Bank, and as well as double up as part of the secretariat driving the presidential economic management team, which was chaired by late President Musa Yar'Adua. So I jumped on that opportunity, came back to Nigeria 2009, found myself right bang in the capital, FCT, working for government, being at the center of policy decisions, formulation, implementation. I didn't have any real policy experience, but I had to quickly learn on the job.
Yeah.
And this was under a technical assistance partnership between the UK government and the Nigerian government, sponsored by DFID, Department for International Development. And so I found myself immersing into the whole policy space, the exposure I started to have engaging with different ministries, departments, agencies, seeing how governance really works, seeing how decision making mechanisms were being done.
But did that being an insider, did that change your views? Because now you used to be the guy reading everybody what they are doing, like these guys don't have it together. Now you're in there.
And in reality, I got perspective. And that actually became a journey that I would say lasted in and out for the next 14 years. So I was engaging with all forms of stakeholders, even private sector, because governance or government is at the heart of pretty much a lot of engagements that happens across the country. So worked under Mansour Mukhtar under late President Yar'Adua's administration. President Yar'Adua passed. Goodluck Jonathan took over.
And he kept you on too.
And his then Minister of Finance, Mr. Olusegun Aganga, came on board and was graceful enough to keep me, retain me in the same position as he was Minister of Finance. On that Minister Ganga, we had the opportunity of doing some interesting interventions. Key amongst it was setting up the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority,
NSIA.
NSIA. I was privileged to be part of the technical team that was assembled under the Minister of Finance.
That's a great job, though, because it's one of the few institutions that I think have been able to maintain almost a private sector veneer.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that was really the idea, to create an investment asset management based entity that will serve the purpose of the entire federation. Make sure that it creates legacy investment, creates sustainability to a lot of the vested capital that the entire
And maybe
federation,
diversify the portfolio of
and
the
diversify the
country.
portfolio, spanning from infrastructure to acting as a kind of budgetary deficit buffer wherever there's any deficits in our budgetary interventions. It can kick in and then create like a savings mechanism for future generations, so to say. And that process was being in setting that framework up. We followed basically global best practices. So I was privileged to learn from various global experts, and we referenced a lot of global case studies and also hired international experts, both from a legal and transactional based perspective. And today I'm proud to look back and reflect
You've done well
and feel like wow,
this reflection you spoke about. Now, you had the first entry with Yaradua, and you came back again in Buhari, and we're now sitting in an APC-led government with inflation almost twice the time, or if not triple the size of the inflation at the time you were there, with unemployment almost 3 times the size it was in 2015. A lot from an economic perspective looks like it's all gloom and doom. But I wanted to know from you, who have been on the ends outside and the inside, where are we? And how do we get out of the rabbit hole from an economic perspective? And in terms of you being bold enough to return home, many people don't see that clarity to make that move. But maybe you could articulate for us this season in the economy with all the removal of subsidy, the policy somersaults, the monetary policy and the fiscal policies. We're battling steady on what it is and how the government is trying to mop out cash in the economy, help people hold down to Naira, right, and all of those things. But where are we?
So I think, we are part of the frontier of, the future of Nigeria. We've had successive administrations, which have spanned from, be it the military class right down now to what is probably called the Fourth Republic, which started from 1999 and has had successive governments post President Obasanjo right down to President Tinubu's administration. It's Nigeria's democracy is fairly nascent. I mean, when you compare it to the likes of the America or other Western countries, I mean, we are probably close to 65 years now in our independency. Sorry. So we are bound to learn, given the dynamics of how we've evolved over the
But
years.
a 65-year-old child is still a 65-year-old child.
Well, you can look at it as a 65-year-old child, but again, don't forget that you've also had this country being stirred by different dynamics of leadership.
Military coups,
civil war, all those dynamics, and a very rapidly growing population. And I think now we are getting to what I'll call a cruising altitude. We are now self-aware of our, various dynamics. I mean, multiple tribes. Um, you've got the majority 50-50 Muslim Christian dynamics. You've got 200 plus million population. The mainstay of our economy has been seen as oil, but then again, we are realizing that putting too much over dependency on oil has to foster more of economic diversification. You have arable land that spans hundreds of thousands of square kilometers uncultivated. You've got fantastic weather, which is somewhat tropical as well. So,
Youthful population.
and a youthful population, absolutely, that probably takes over 60-65% of the population from 0 to 35 years, as we would classify as youths. And one thing you can never take away from us as Nigerians is our ability to persevere and be extremely resilient despite our journey over the years. I mean, one thing you would see about Nigerians is, and maybe late fella symbolized that in one of his music, suffering but still smiling. And that's quite unique. Yes, you highlighted some of the indicators in our economy, double-digit inflation, high unemployment, and the likes. But I think now we're becoming more self-conscious. And we're becoming more self-conscious because we are now aware of what's playing out in a globalized environment. And we are now aware that the reality is charity has to begin at home. And all you've got at the end of the day is your home base in reality. Yes, you have a high level of high rate of people migrating to
Japa thing.
other countries under the guise of Japa and all of that.
Was there a
But
good
then
side to
again,
that?
well, it's a yes and no. And I think yes in the sense that if you went there, to get a broader based level of understanding and have a broad based level of what it means to be part of a globalized ecosystem, then the answer is yes, because you have the opportunity of going to good schools, gain good jobs and experiences. But at the end of the day, whilst you're through that journey of whether it's your working experience, you can still remit back in terms of
huge
remittances back. Yeah, I mean, I think 2023, the World Bank probably rated it somewhere in the likes of maybe Nigerian specific, somewhere about $20 to $25 billion coming back in remittances, coming back home. So that's good. But the question is, how well are we utilizing those remittances back locally? Two, if you're jackpine or migrating, and you are not embedded in the core of those countries you have been to, or you find yourself on the menial side of things, then you start to ask yourself, what's the real value and worth at the end of the day? But that being said, I mean, when we look inwards now, we are becoming more self-conscious. I mean, thankfully, we can see what's happening on the cultural space, on the entertainment space. We're seeing that even at that, lots of talent, whether it's in the areas of sports, entertainment, and the ability to just push the flag flying for your country, Nigeria. Look at what's happening in the Afrobeat scene now, where young talents who are harnessed here locally are able to export their entertainment abilities on the global scale, and yet there's acceptability.
Casey, you've hit something that I know you're quite vast. Like, I mean, you had mentioned about creating funds, but before we move into this creative space, which is something I'm very passionate about, and my industry,
Yes.
I just wanted to just sort of wrap up on this governance and politics for a bit.
Correct. Good.
You're an Igbo man who grew up in Lagos for most part of your life. The last election, people said, was very, very polarized, very, very borderline tribalistic. And it started to feed almost the sense of the palpitation people experienced during the Civil War, where you're hearing things like, go back home to Abia State, go back home to where you're coming from. From your own experience, do you think that post-election enough is being done to stabilize or at least educate people away from the tribalistic bias, to help people understand that a bad president is a bad president, or a good president is a good president for all, regardless of your tribe or your religion? Is about the competence and ability to deliver. But the last election has left us with so many questions and wounds that have not closed. But as someone who grew up in Lagos, who saw both sides, an Igbo man, an Igbo culture, Yoruba culture, and that tension has always been there, how do you reconcile that reality, and how do you think we can move forward from there?
Well, I think if I come back to our generation, which I'll say, 40s downwards, I think we are really at that pinnacle of really demystifying what it means to be in a united Nigeria, which I think is truly possible. I mean, post the Civil War, we've still had the country stand on one footing, one strong footing. I mean, the two sides were still able to come together, irrespective of the fact that there were still bruises and wounds as an aftermath of the war. And when you look at it today, you can see what's happening with the Southeasterners who are here in Nigeria, immersed in almost all spheres of the economy, of the economy. I mean, and nowhere you would go to in Nigeria that you wouldn't see quite a number of them, whether it's the north or west or south or wherever, they're all immersed there. And I guess it's for quite a number of other tribes, the ability to integrate into various parts of the country. Now, the last election, we all saw that quite polarized, as you rightfully said. But at the end of the day, I think the real game changer for that election in specific, I would say, was the politics itself. But I think barring the politics aside, I think we're all conscious of the fact that we all have to find a way to move on in some way or form. As a sovereign nation, there's no other place we can call our country other than Nigeria in itself. And I think what the leadership of today is quite conscious of is that it has to serve for the entire country and for its people, regardless of the nuances and perceptions that people may have or people may say. I mean, and fact be told, if you look at the last summary of the last Federal Executive Council meeting that just played out on Monday, the Federal Executive Council led by President Tinubu approved loads of road infrastructure projects. And I kid you not, majority of those projects were domiciled within the southeast and south-south axis. Which shows that regardless of the perceptions, the Federation or the center understands that, look, it has to serve for all in a sense. And I think it's one of the things we all need to set aside in our mindset that, look, regardless of these things, we just have to come together and just move ahead. I mean, I'm married to someone from the Southwest. I went to marry from Osun State. and it's just a reflection of is the way I see the country. I'm Igbo, grew up in Lagos. I mean, majority of my childhood was immersed out of Lagos. I wouldn't claim I had all of that from my father's village, which obviously is my heritage or my roots. But, Lagos is where I know the most. I feel very at home here, in as much as I can still go back, to my, heritage or roots back in Abia State. But we are those guardians today.
Sure.
And we just have to realize that we have to put that positive mindset and positive front to ensure that the country continues to remain united.
On leadership in Africa. Leadership in Africa, I think that we've always been, people talk about our quality of leadership as being subpar to the global quality. And that sometimes you find very quality leaders in the private sector, but not in the public sector. And across Africa, you have a very rich resource continent that has been largely not harnessed to economic prosperity and gain. The indices are crossed from maternal mortality to unemployment, yet it's a prime population, right? And I think in about 2050, Africans will hit 2.5 billion, which is 25% of the world population then. And we're talking about a median age of somewhere between hovering around 18.5 to 19.6. So everything is good and bad. It's such an interesting twist. But looking at we're still dealing with portions of war on the continent, tensions and all of those things. In your own perspective of Africa, if you're allowed to paint a picture of what you think the Africa of your dream is, and how you in your own mind think young Africans, who are mostly our listeners, can tap into their collective disaffection and channel it into a mission. But maybe the question is about your dreams for Africa amidst all the challenges.
I think we're in a very amazing era right now, and this is an era where I think Africa will truly reach a self-realization. I mean, your indices are spot on the continent. Today, we're about 1.2 billion. Again, majority of that, 70% of that is the youthful population. A lot of energy, resilience, vibrancy that is immersed in that youthful population. You're correct. Leadership broadly has been seen in the subpar, has been assessed in a subpar manner. However, you have a continent that is blessed with tremendous resources, natural, human capital, resource, excellent weather, at least compared to what you're getting in the Western dynamic. However, I do think that because we're getting into this self-consciousness era where we are now realizing that, look, there's pride in being the African that you are, whether it's by virtue of your culture, your tradition, your heritage. Because of that consciousness, it's giving us that confidence to now understand that we are part of what makes the entire makeup of the entire world, in our rightful manner. No one really deserves to shortchange us or make us feel lesser than we are. And I think that leads me to how I then think I see the Africa of my dream. Yeah. Because we have this dynamic population, which has become very self-aware and self-conscious, I think by virtue of that, everything becomes all-encompassing. Culture, tradition, beliefs, the skin color, the environment, the climate, just by being part of that ecosystem makes us become attractive in such a way that I feel that Africa in itself, the real value it can sell to the world is being able to export Africa as some kind of a commodity. So, be it that culture, let the entire world be able to feel like, wow, we can get a bit of Africa through the Afro beats.
Yeah.
Be it through the food that we eat. People should be out there globally, be it in the Western world, Europe, and say, oh, you know what? We want to have a taste of that akara or that jollof rice. Be it the cultural festivals that we have. People should feel like, you know what? I want to attend the Eyo Festival, or I want to attend the Calabar Carnival. Be it by the way we dress. People should feel like I want to wear that kente or whatever it is. People should hear about our weddings, how we celebrate when we want to get married.
Because this thing, I love the way you entered about exporting Africa. Americans did that.
Yes.
Americans took stories, created this American dream, commoditized and exported it. And we were all colonized. I mean, we knew more about Tupac than most of us knew back in the day about Oris Wiliki.
Correct.
Or we knew more around the B.I.G. than we knew even about Sonny Ade. So in a sense, that was the power of storytelling. But for you to export Africa as capital, so let's talk a bit about capital. Yes. The creative sector has been one of the least funded. And I really want to know why you chose that as your area of focus to raise capital for the creative sector. I mean, most people with your kind of profile and background, they want to do infrastructure. They want to do oil and gas. But you're choosing the most vulnerable, the most complicated sector of the economy. I want to know why. And what are the challenges you think why entrepreneurs are not able to access this capital even when they are there?
So thank you. I mean, so in and out, after I ran through a course of close to 14 years in public sector, so I did a bit of Jonathan's administration, serving as an SA to his Minister of Finance and Trade and Investment. Also had my stint under President Buhari's administration, serving as an SA, special assistant on industrialization in the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and also had exposure into the Ministry of Solid Minerals as well. And after that, I had the opportunity of serving as, which is a portfolio I hold as well today, Senior Country Director to the U.S. Nigeria Council for Food Security, Trade and Investment. And the idea is to use that council as a platform to deepen U.S. and Nigeria business and commercial ties. And when I started to reflect back on my experience, particularly in public service, I mean, I went very hard on myself to critique and say, look, I'm not sure we have reached our true destination and potential in terms of, the potential of our economic growth and development. And I started to feel like, what could some of us start to do differently that could complement where we're currently at? And in my thinking process, I felt that, look, Africa and its governance will continue to have its challenges. And typically, every government would really be thinking, how can we solve for our people, give them the basic welfare infrastructure, schools, education, healthcare, and basic infrastructure. And then also think about how can you empower your citizens from a wealth creation or an economic standpoint. But then I started to also have a deeper appreciation that, thinking about it, a lot of us Africans are innately talented and have come from a place of deeply rooted culture, cultural beliefs, tradition, community, the things that makes us very African. yeah, whether it's your food or just your ecosystem makeup. And that's there to make me realize that all that surrounds us as Africans, and also given the fact that as human beings, we are innately creative in some way or form, you know. So whether Fedi went to school or not, chances are Fedi may probably just be able to either sing, dance, draw, paint, or do something, or even sports, or might just be a good cook, or might just be as good looking as he is, become a model, just showcasing
I want to
African.
life, by the way.
There you go. So I thought all of these values could be harnessed from a wealth empowerment perspective. And if some of us can start to have a clear line of focus to say, look, how do we galvanize all of this talent in a very systematic manner that can lead to one, empowering those people. So whether Fedi is able to go to the government schools that may or may not be provided by the government, at least one thing is clear: Fedi might just be a good singer or a good creative in some way.
Yeah.
And perhaps if we bring it back home, I mean, let's look at our young talents today in the entertainment space and maybe drill it down to the music space today. I mean, we're seeing a bunch of young kids, millennials, Arya Star, Rema, name them, and look at the impact they're making, exporting all that talent on a global scale. So if we were systematic to create that ecosystem that can and replicate it across and ensure that if a young Freddie can't make it into the government schools or universities for whatever reason, at least there's also an alternative that could ensure he can still harness whatever he has on the creative side. And so that became a passion for me. And I said to myself, actually, why don't we start to look at the business of supporting the creative ecosystem? And I spent some time doing a bit of research on how the creative ecosystem can become more of a formalized industry in a sense. And from my research, I started to understand infrastructure was a key issue. So in fact, let me take it back. 2018, I had the opportunity of being on a trip that was led by Vice President Yemi Oshibajo.
Okay.
And that trip led us to Silicon Valley and to Hollywood. And so in sitting down on his segment at the Hollywood leg, I remember sitting down with one of a well-known industry player in the film space, And I sat down with the industry player, and the executive there said to me, we see all the numbers coming out from Africa in terms of entertainment. We see what's happening on the movie side in particular. Nigeria has a very significant output in terms of movies. Perhaps might even have one of the highest outputs compared to Nollywood, Hollywood, and Bollywood. But the reality is the quality of that output
Wasn't global enough.
is not global enough. And so they were still not sure what was the best approach to take a position in a Nollywood. And that became a food for thought for me. And I said to myself, actually, I think I get it. That really it's got to be infrastructure. Because if you had infrastructure that could be developed at scale where any of the big Hollywood majors can say, look, we can take a position in this infrastructure, and, it's just like what you're doing in Magic Studios, which, I mean, I commend you on. And you've done this at scale for a number of years, and we know that there's still a lot of growth ahead of you. And if such kinds of partnerships could be fostered coming from Hollywood down here, then what then happens is it's not just about capital. It's about cross exchange of capacity. It's about creating that sustainability model. It's about ensuring that there's that acceptance of practices so that it's in line with global best practices in terms of your output. Then that becomes the opportunity. Because then, whether it's a Disney or a Pixar or a Paramount studio, once they're embedded in the infrastructure, no matter what the inputs and outputs that comes out of that infrastructure, at least a good portion of it would meet to the minimum acceptable standard that can then be showcased not just locally, but then any of these big brands can say, look, we're happy to.
But do you think it's the size of the budget? Because again, until the streamers got here,
Yes.
which is Amazon and Netflix, and our cost of production and the size of the cinema itself could not allow people to invest more than a particular amount. So a typical investor would tell you, we don't have enough cinemas. Why are you guys projecting to make $1 million? Nobody has done that. You get, and so the cap. Fluke broke 1.6 billion
Yes.
naira in December.
By
But-
$1 million, yeah.
Yeah,
About.
was it in dollars?
No, yeah, it was in naira. But what I'm saying is,
Yeah, yes.
just about naira equivalent.
Yes.
Yeah.
So again, it comes down to capital. For you to make a great thing, there's storytelling, but there's also budget and technology. And I think on the technology side, there's still a limitation, but more also the capital side is almost non-existent. So where stories travel, it's Hollywood has budget. They're doing movies for $200 million. Nigerians are doing it for 200 million naira. And it's not the same thing, guys.
Correct.
200 million. It's not the same thing. It looks like a number of zeros. So I'm just also curious as to your fund. Tell us about that. What you're setting up and how. I know that a lot of creatives are going to be listening to this because and quite a number of people that I follow are within the ecosystem as well.
Yeah.
But how is the fund active now? How do they assess it? And what are the industries you're particularly taking off with?
So good. So I decided to start up something called the PACED Fund, PACED Fund, which basically is an acronym for a Pan-African Creative Economy Development Fund. And the focus of the fund is to focus on investing in one, infrastructure, two, go into the financial and legal engineering of converting intellectual property as an asset class, and three, able to galvanize funding support to develop human capacity within the creative segment. And the 6 verticals that we want to focus on in terms of subsectors are 1, entertainment, which is an accumulation of music and movies. 2 is arts and culture, a lot of your visual artists, sculptures, all of that. 3 is fashion. Fashion I'm quite passionate about because from my time in government, we looked at doing industrial parks that will support the development of the textile and garment space. And I had the opportunity of going to China to get more learning, perspective, and exposure. And it then dawned on me that actually it will be an ideal, and hopefully this is the direction we'll all end up at, where a lot of our standard everyday African or cultural attires can be standardized from a production standpoint. So whether it's your Euro and Boba or your kaftan or whatever it is, you can standardize it from a production standpoint, whether it's leveraging on technology, but of course, appreciating the IP from the fashion designer, but standardize it and be able to produce at scale so that we can start to export it to international markets. There's a big diaspora consumer base for our local fabrics and fashion styles. I also think that a lot of our entertainment ambassadors should also now be intentional about adopting a lot of our local fashion brands. I see a lot of these big entertainers from the Nigerian side promoting whether it's Gucci, Boss, and all these brands.
So proud of really Nigerian brands.
So we want them to promote made in Nigerian brands. But anyways, to my verticals, there's fashion, then there's sports, then there's culinary arts, which is your food, and the final is tourism, which we think has a huge potential for growth. And obviously, I commend what's going on the federal government side. I can see what they're doing very actively, and we want to be a supporting catalyst for that. So the structure has been set up. We are at the very early stage of fundraise, but more importantly, we're taking positions on some pilot projects, which in due course will be announced shortly. One is around the music side, hopefully create some synergies and partnerships around music and entertainment.
Okay.
Two is do some little pilot projects around the sporting side, make some little investments to support some interesting sports clusters. Three is promote some initiatives around tourism. At least these will be some of the initial pilot projects that will be announced pretty soon. And yes, close out on the first layer of our seed funding and commitments. We're having some interesting conversations, and then hopefully, scale that up to more institutional investors and investments. Hopefully, once they start to see the performance of some of the pilot initiatives that are working, that are already in the pipeline.
All right, so I think we're all very excited about the potential of the creative economy. I love the verticals you're focusing on: entertainment, looking at art and sculpturing, look at fashion, looking at sports. We haven't scratched the surface of any of these, but I think that a generation of young people took Afrobeat, African music, and today that music is literally everywhere in the world.
Those guys are rock stars.
They're rock stars. And I would say that when I was growing up, the music that defined my teens were Tupac, Biggie, maybe if you throw in Maze was around at the time.
Yeah.
It was a lot of rap music, and
You avoided mentioning Puff Daddy.
I was not going there, and R. Kelly, but those two, nobody mentions. And no cancel for that. But yeah, Puff was quite strong back in the day, right? And no, but then a lot of talented young people were very American in their approach to music. Fast forward to now, we're seeing a change. Then you had to westernize to become global.
Correct.
Now you have to Africanize to become global. We're seeing that even people like Selena Gomez, well, they want to do stuff. Chris Brown and Wizkid, I'm sure they're coming out with something new. Like everyone is trying to jump or work with an African artist. That has changed, but a group of people defined it. Then when we look at fintech, so let's talk about fintech. I think in the last 10 years, we've seen 4 companies emerge as unicorns. I mean,
Right.
Interswitch, Flutterwave, Paystack, and MoneyPoint. Right? And all of these are successes of the last 10 years because a group of people decided we want to solve the payment issues in Africa. And they decided to solve through payment, remittance, all of those other aspects. I see a possibility where we harness that Nigerian spirit and channel it. What we discover there, it's always tremendous. And I'm really, really seeing that creative space will happen, and it will happen, and it's happening. In animation and gaming, it will happen. In film, it will happen. Once capital collide with innovation, revolution is the outcome, right? And I think people like you are rare, because I don't always find men with the money that like to talk creative. So when you meet people who want to invest, they just look at you guys, oh, artists, oh, then you finish with them, and like, you know that they're struggling because
Yes.
yeah. And then sometimes creatives don't know how to talk numbers. So I often say, for us to change that creative journey,
Correct. Yes.
we would need to have a situation where you would find people who can speak the language of money, speak the language of art, and speak the business of art.
Correct.
But let's talk about made in Aba. Chinese, a couple of years back, came up with a policy of creative imitation or reverse engineering. And what they did at the time was they would send people to the US to go and learn. They will buy the US technology, they'll sit with it, unpack the technology, study it, reverse it, duplicate, clone, learn.
No.
And over time, they started by creating similar technology, creating capacity. At first, they were inferior. 20 years ago, it wasn't a thing of pride to buy made in China, because buying made in China was almost buying poor, buying cheap.
Yes.
Now that is changing. Today, Chinese literally have almost 3.3 trillion worth of IPs that they've built on the back of a lot of innovation. And we've seen even in AI now, DeepSeek is popping up and helping us discover that for a fraction of what the American companies will spend building, they're doing that. I really think that there is something about the energy of Aba in your state, the beauty of that entrepreneurial energy, raw and real.
Correct.
Guys are churning themselves out. There is really, really nothing harnessing that yet. But what can Aba be for Africa? Can it really become that creation, production hub for the continent that can actually allow for us to start taking pride in wearing Nigeria, dressing Nigeria, from textile to different aspects of production that we need, that how Aba can be central to catalyzing the production in Africa. And also, you have an economic and finance background, so understanding that if our import is always higher than our export, we're still at a variable point.
Yeah.
Right? And to diversify the economy, we must come to production. So give us a picture of what Aba really can do for us, the Made in Aba, and how that can feed into our Made in Nigeria, proudly Nigerian narrative.
So thank you. I mean, Aba is an interesting case study. I mean, I look back when I was working in Abuja. I have an uncle very close to me. He too was a public servant in Abuja. And pretty much every other month, he would call me and say, hey, K-boy, look at this suit I just got. I got a couple of pairs of suits. Look at this shoe. Look at this trouser. Look at this attire. I'm like, yeah, uncle, I love it. Makes sense. Looks good. Nice cut. Feels good on you. And he would say, it's Uche from Aba that did this or did that. And honestly, I could see over time the consistency and uplift in the performance and the quality of what my uncle would showcase as a made in Aba product. Of course, maybe not quite comparable to your Taviro per se, but you could already see the emergence of something that has a strong potential. Aba truly is what I'll call a center of resilience and innovation. I mean, at least the last I left of it, and I'm talking, let me go back to my government days, 2017, 18, thereabouts. Dilapidated infrastructure, zero infrastructure, in fact. Whether it's the access road points to access to power or the critical backbone infrastructure that can make Aba truly industrialize, zero existence. But yet, the output that comes out of it, based on pure sheer resilience.
We used to have one of the lowest power facility to power industrialized area, it was terrible. I don't know if that has changed from what Alex.
And I think there are a few interventions happening.
But are you working with Alex at any point?
No, not working with Alex. However, in my time at the federal level, we had a policy under President Buhari's administration, which was to promote industrial parks. And one of the clusters we did look at or tried to promote, and I would love to check where things are at now, was the Aimba Economic Development City, which was meant to be an industrial park to restructure Aba and its environs, from an industrial perspective. So probably a 3,000 hectare site where it was going to have all the critical infrastructure from power to road access to logistics to evacuation, storage and the likes, to ensure that the Aba ecosystem can now have all the supporting infrastructure and at the same time can evacuate either for export or for domestic consumption. But despite Aba and its challenges, the most fascinating thing was almost anything could be replicated in Aba. And that speaks for a lot because it shows that if you now start to add on the right enabling environment, you can almost try and imagine what would come out of Aba. Anything can be imitated in Aba. So I'm quite convinced that the current administration in Abia is making very deliberate and concerted efforts to really industrialize Aba as the real commercial nerve or industrial nerve within the Southeast region, and possibly could even have a more domineering impact on the country as a whole.
Continent.
And the continent, because of its sheer ability to innovate, in a sense. I know Professor Batunaji, a former Minister of Power, has an IPP project to put in power plants, and I know the core target is to really focus on the Aba industrial cluster. So it will be a shame if, whether from the national government or the state government, that Aba would not be given priority focus in terms of cleaning up and really supporting them in terms of the required infrastructure, because that energy, that ability to innovate, that resilience, and the potential that ecosystem can have on our economy is tremendous. And it's something that could be very, very significant for the brand of Nigeria.
I think this is exciting. So in wrapping up, I want you to briefly speak to how you balance family and work, and if there are anything other entrepreneurs out there can learn from just this finding the balance. Because one way is almost like to be a successful businessman is to be a failed family man, or to be a successful family man is to be a failed businessman. I think that there are people like you who embody that integration and balance.
Absolutely. Thank you. So yes, I'm married to a lovely lady called Lola Ekugo. We're privileged to have a loving daughter. Good thing with Lola as well is, she's also very active, super smart, smarter than I am, a first class brain, a tech expert. She's in the digital innovation and transformation segment, and also a creative, actually. She wrote a book called Lagos to London, a fictional book, which basically highlights the whole Japa syndrome.
Lagos to London, I think I kind of know about that book.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, that was launched.
It's a long time. It was during the time of what was this magazine by a rookie, Ladoja? She was editor. of that magazine, Rookie Ladoja. I think it was crazy. I've forgotten that magazine now, but they had this Lagos to London review at the time. Yeah, and I think it's something I would like to read.
Yeah,
at some point.
you should, and maybe there could be synergy to animate it to Yajik.
It's possible.
A story of two fictional characters, Nnamdi Okonkwo and Remy Coker, and how they meet in London and all of that. But yeah,
it was a bit of your story in there. Were you the Nnamdi and Shidi Coker?
Well, truth be told, the answer is no. However, I think my wife may have drawn some inspiration from our dynamics in a sense, but I'm clearly not Nnamdi Okonkwo, but yes, I mean, there could have been some inspiration in a sense. But that being said, we are both quite active and quite supportive of each other's progression. And at the heart of it, because we try and be a support system for one another, that means that coming back to the home front, it keeps some level of balance in a sense, because then we're each other's support system. And at the same time, we know that, look, as a unit, we have a clear pathway we are trying to achieve as a unit. And at the heart of it is really all about family, really, family number one, and number two, making some level of impact, no matter how small or big. Because again, it's a small knit family, the three of us with our daughter. We try and pay a lot of attention to how we, support
the teamwork of leaning to each other's strength.
Absolutely.
I think it's something that I really think it's something that is very powerful when couples get them right. But our final question would be, should we have asked you a question that we didn't? What would that question be?
I guess maybe that question is a tough one, but
we went everywhere actually. Politics.
We went everywhere. But I guess maybe that question would be, what's your greatest fear?
Yes. Let's land on that. What are your greatest fears? Or what is your greatest fear?
This is a very thought-provoking question.
Even I'm asking you, I'm thinking it.
But I think that question, and perhaps the way I would respond to that, is I will tie that with a comment I saw a few days ago, I think on social media. And I will reflect that from the perspective of how I dealt with grief when I lost my father. And the comment said, "We live to die." And I started to ponder on that statement. We live to die. And for me, it's really about not making impact when really we have all it takes to make the desired impact we want to make. And so for me, my fear would be not living to my true and full potential, which really is all about trying to make impact in some way or form, whether it's to my close-knit family or whether it's to the continent at large, and I'll take a quote from my church, the Elevation Church, which says, make greatness common. I think we have all it takes to truly be great at whatever it is that we choose to do. And we can make it part of our everyday lives and make it truly common in how it reflects and interjects with every sphere of our life.
I think that's a good place to land, making greatness common. So, guys, in just wrapping up our conversation with Kelechi, there are many things we spoke about. A passionate young man whose love for the country brought him back home and to serve two governments, right? Serves with Yar'Adua and also with Buhari. But also beyond just policy, after that season was over, finding himself seeing an entire ecosystem of verticals that are not really accessing capital. And he did not just sit back and complain. He got to work, rolled his sleeves, and today he's trying to create a framework through which we can capitalize some of our most vulnerable sectors, from entertainment to sports to fashion to art. I really think this is someone to learn a lot from. But more importantly, just also thinking about the possibilities and potential of Africa. We did a case study on ABBA, the potential of ABBA, from creative engineering to creative imitation to reverse engineering, how China became a world power for production. If Africa is going to become a production center, industrializing places like ABBA, upscaling with R&D, with investment, and with the right industrial infrastructure can allow for us to export to the rest of Africa and even to the rest of the world. It's time for Africa to build. And I think that's one thing I'm taking away from here. But the motto is not just about living and dying, but living and dying empty. When you get to the end of the road, you'll be glad that you lived because you died empty. You poured it all, you left a legacy, and you made greatness come up. Guys, that's where I call it short for today. See you again. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.